Need more light. Need more light.
What is that?
Hi there. Good evening. Hello. Welcome.
Hello.
A little early, but not that early. Good to see you. We're gonna start letting people come on in. Hello.
Hello, Rabbi.
Hi, Schulmans. How are you?
Very good. How are you?
Good. It's good to see you. Everything going okay there?
Everything is fine. How about for you?
Yeah, no, everything's good. We're it's hard to believe we're coming to the end of the first month of the year. The first month of, wow. I don't know. People over there getting vaccinated, and what's the story in Texas? Are people getting vaccinated there?
We're 31,000 on the list for our county, and they're at 10,000. They were at 10,000 last Friday.
So what does that mean? What are they how many are they doing per day, roughly?
Well, that I don't know. You know, I mean, it all depends on how much they get.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. And where do you know where they're gonna vaccinate you at? The center?
Well, possibly within the next 2 to 3 weeks.
What? I can't hear you.
There is a place approximately a 40-minute flight. We've got an appointment for February 21st.
Okay.
To go to Longview, Texas to get the vaccine. So we're going to fly on a Sunday morning and get the vaccine and be done on February 21st.
Okay. So how did you pick that place? We lost you. We lost your audio. Yeah, now we got you. Yeah.
Okay. Well, a friend knew that we were wanting to get the vaccine, and she knew about it and called me and gave me the information. I went out to the website and signed up.
Gotcha. Interesting. Well,
so that's 2 lists that we're on.
I know that my aunt she lives in Orange County. She got vaccinated at Disneyland. And I know people are getting vaccinated out by us at Magic Mountain, Dodger Stadium. So we're turning all of our places of fun into recreation places, into vaccination places. So I hope that they're going to be going quick through the list.
A new definition of fun.
I guess, but I'll tell you, it is fun knowing that you've got that out of the way.
True.
My second shot, I guess, 2 weeks from now, and I'm looking forward to being able to check that off the list. So yeah, we hope everybody gets it, and I know it's going to take some time, but hopefully everyone will have that checked off their list.
Rabbi, since I want to get off the subject.
Yeah.
We saw a movie today that we recorded and we watched. I don't know if you've seen it, but it was probably the worst biblical movie I've ever seen. It was with Stuart Granger, called Sodom and Gomorrah.
I do know what you're talking about. I do know the movie.
They didn't use anything from the Torah except for the last scene when she turns into a pillar of salt, and that's it.
Yeah, that's an old movie. Yeah, I don't know too much about how it got made and why it got made, but there is a there were biblical movies made and still made that are sometimes you gotta. I will tell you that it's been a long time since I've seen it. I mean, probably decades since I've seen that one, but I will tell you that I saw a really horrible Bible movie that was only made about 15, 20 years ago that I think was the worst biblical movie I've ever seen, which was one they did about, it was supposed to be about Noah. It was called The Flood, and it was John Voight starred as Noah, and it was on NBC, I remember.
Oh, I saw part of it and I turned it off.
It had nothing to, I mean, like it was crazy. I mean, like Lot was in the story. There was a whole thing with Lot there. And I mean, it was just so disjointed and so kind of like, it was almost like they brought in stuff that was not even, it was confusing and disjointed and it wasn't very well done. And that was really, really bad. I think most bodies and get something out of it. This one was like public. I mean, it was so weird why they did that. But almost every other Bible movie I like. But it's been a long time since I saw the Sodom and Gomorrah one. So
yeah, this one,
it's been a long time.
At the end, it was almost like watching Exodus because he took not just his family out, but about 2,000 extras that left with him.
Well, that's definitely not in the Bible. It's interesting that you brought up this subject. What made you think about? I mean, I guess you just saw it.
You know, it's like anytime there's a biopic of the Bible, Torah, I want to watch it. And I'm sorry, I didn't. I didn't watch it. I walked down on it.
Sometimes you need to get away from the kids.
It's interesting that you bring that up, and I was just going to bring up something because this week's Torah portion is the most famous Torah portion for movies of all time, right?
Oh, yeah.
This week, I thought maybe that's why you brought it up, because this week is actually the Torah portion of the Sea of Reeds, the Red Sea parting, right? And this is the biblical epic of.
Well, we don't know if it's the Red Sea, right?
Well, it's interesting because I was just reading that book that I was showing you the other day, the Friedman book on the Bible, and he actually says it is the Red Sea.
See, I always heard it wasn't. They don't know if it was or not.
Yeah, he seems pretty adamant that it is the Red Sea. So, yeah, some people call it the Sea of Reeds. Some people say it may be the Red Sea. He's pretty secure that it is, in fact, the Red Sea. So I will find out. I can't remember why he said that, but he was very adamant, Friedman's book, that it is in fact the Red Sea, that Red Sea. So let me get this ready to go up on Facebook right now. But yes, it is weird.
Has the bottom of the Red Sea ever been dredged for chariots?
Well, that's what. So some people have done sonar studies. Some people have tried to prove the Red Sea. We don't have proof, right? So we don't have. We have no proof. But I think one of the important things I said last week was that Richard Friedman, the Bible professor I'm talking about, he says just because there isn't proof that it happened doesn't mean that that's proof that it didn't happen. And there are and what I talked about before was there's a lot of people who say the story of Exodus was made up, didn't happen because we haven't found archaeological proof for it. And he says, well, what would we have found from 3,000 years ago that would have proven it? So he said, there's not really a chance that we would have found evidence. And so just because we haven't found evidence doesn't mean that it didn't happen. So he's very careful in saying that. And again, I think I told you before, he's of the belief that it did happen. It may not have happened at the level of millions of people, but he does make a very strong case for the fact that at least some people left Egypt with a leader, call him Moses, call him whatever you want, but it's very likely that he did. And what's interesting is he actually, he has a hard job because he actually says, look, if we don't have archaeological evidence, what do we have? We have the text itself. And so he uses the text itself to try to show why this isn't an invented story, why this isn't a myth, why this isn't a a fable. And so he does that, I think, in a very cogent way. And I'm looking for the book again to show you, because I know I've showed it before. It's called Exodus by Richard Friedman. But one of the things that he does say in the book as well is that while we don't have archaeological evidence, we do have something very interesting, which we didn't have before. And that is we have genetic evidence. And the genetic evidence that we have now is showing that maybe there is a Cohen gene that we have. And there might even be, by the way, a Levitical gene, a gene for the Levites that can be identified. And if that is the case, then we actually might be able to show roughly the time that at least the Levites, who he believes the Levites are the ones who actually made the Exodus, Moses' tribe, Aaron's tribe, that if that group of people, the Levites, made this Exodus, we might.
Yeah, I was there.
might actually,
my dad.
Might actually be able to show that genetic marker from when those people were introduced into the Jewish community. Anyways, there actually might be genetic evidence for it, which, by the way, while it's not archaeological evidence, is still scientific, provable evidence. And by the way, might be pretty interesting to consider that evidence is, maybe within us, we carry these, for example, the Cohen gene proved that there was at least a group of people that are part of our people that are common to Jews, whether they're Sephardic, Ashkenazic, from other parts of the world, whether they're not even Jewish anymore, but believe that they were Jewish. So if a group of people claim to be a lost tribe, or that they were descendants of Jews, that we can do this study. And when we find the Cohenic gene, that we know that they probably, at least some of those people, were Jewish. So the genetic information that I just consider this for a second, that the proof for some of the biblical accounts might not be in the ground. They might be in you. And that's a weird thing to think about, to say, to maybe wrap your head around the fact that the Bible, the accounts of the Bible might be more factual, if you will, not true. I'll say try not to use the word true, but more factual based on your genetics, is kind of an amazing idea. That the proof for the Bible, you can make the argument the proof for God is you, because each one of us is a miracle. Each one of us is one of the greatest examples of things that are not explainable, if you will. Yeah. So maybe the proof for the Bible itself is in us. So that's an interesting idea. I think as we know more about genetics, as we learn more, I think we're going to find some interesting things. Again, some of it has already been proven. The Cohenic gene, it's already been proven. And the people who discovered it, which of course were geneticists in Israel, were not actually looking to prove it. They were actually looking to disprove it. And they approached it from a very skeptical frame of mind, the scientists, and were very surprised to see when they found the evidence. They were shocked at how accurate it was.
Rabbi,
so they were not looking to prove it. Yeah.
So the Cohen gene, is that only Cohens would have that gene, or all Jews would have that gene?
Well, not necessarily all Jews would have it, but if you take a group of people who claim to be Jewish, you'll find that with a higher percentage amongst that group of people. So that means that you'll find some Kohanim or descendants of Kohanim in that group. If you don't find any descendants of Kohanim in that group, it's very likely that they're not actually have Jewish ancestry. So for example, when we did the study on Ethiopian Jews, we didn't find the Kohanic gene.
Oh, you did?
We didn't. So they were not genetically proven. Interestingly, when we studied the Lemba in South Africa, further south from Ethiopia, when we did a study of the Lemba, they actually came back with Kohanic genes, which is...
And how many people are we talking about in South Africa?
Conceivably hundreds of thousands of people.
Really? Wow.
So it's 60 Minutes did a profile on them 15 years, 20 years ago. There have been stories about them since, and I've spoken to some of them. They are, I mean, genetic, and they're not the only group. I mean, there were other groups too that.
So when you went down there on a vacation a few years ago, correct?
2 years ago, yeah.
Did you talk to them then?
I did, but I didn't go to where they were living because the majority of them, or not say the majority, but the majority of them in the group that is the most organized too. I mean, there are definitely Lemba in South Africa, but the biggest group and the synagogue, if you will, is in Harare, which is in Zimbabwe. And Zimbabwe was not safe 2 years ago. It's a little bit better today, but I still wouldn't go to Zimbabwe.
So some of them are actually practicing Jews then?
Some of them are practicing now, yeah. Some of them are discovering and reconnecting and studying with Jews, and we'll see what happens. The interesting thing is that they haven't been officially sanctioned, if you will, by the Israeli government. And then we also actually just got word yesterday that the Uganda community, which is 100% not from Jewish origin genetically, and we know that, they don't claim to be. They claim to have started to convert about 100 years ago. The Israeli government is not upholding their status as Jews, which is really frustrating. They're the first movement. They're the first group, the Abu Yadaya in Uganda, that have been trained and mentored by the conservative movement. So their Rabbi Gershom, who we actually brought out to Temple Beth Ami a few years back, he was studying at University of Judaism, or AJU in LA, and he got his smicha, he got his ordination there, and then he's gone back to Uganda. But right now, the Israel government just yesterday decided that they were not going to recognize them as Jews, which is disappointing and not surprising, but disappointing because.
But if they went through conversion, then they would be recognized, correct?
They went through conversion.
Then why wouldn't they? Then why wouldn't the government?
They went through conversion under conservative auspices, and so they were not recognized as immediate citizens. Now, the weird thing is that if you went through a conversion ceremony with me or with a reform or conservative rabbi, well, let's say a conservative rabbi for sure, in America, you would be recognized as a Jew in Israel.
Right.
No problem. The problem is you wouldn't be given status in the rabbinical eyes of Israel to be married in Israel. So you'd have a problem. You would have no problem making aliyah, but you would have no problem making aliyah, being a citizen, but you would have a problem getting married in Israel because the Israelis.
Could you get the COVID charge?
Yes, no. I wish it was that. No, an Orthodox rabbi would not recognize you, so you couldn't get married in Israel. You could get married outside of Israel. You could continue to be a citizen in Israel. That wouldn't be a problem. But you could not be married or go through anything that the rabbis would have to consider. But you would be able to be a citizen. It was the compromise that Israel made 72 years ago. The weird thing is that if you convert a group en masse, like we did with the Abu Yadaya, then it's a problem. So to me, it's kind of silly, and it's also probably a little racist. But if that Ugandan Jew was in America, converted with me in America, he could make aliyah to Israel, and they never say anything about it.
Right.
But if they do it as a group of 100 people in Uganda, now they're going to say that they can't do it.
That's ridiculous.
So, look, it's still going through the courts in Israel, and it literally, if you look it up, it just happened. I'll share it because I just saw the article. I mean, I just got the article yesterday. I'm upset about it. A lot of people are upset, but I'm not really.
I don't know what that means. If you like,
No,
I can search the web for.
Siri, that's okay. You don't need to say. Okay, so I'm just going to pop up this article. So this is from Israeli newspaper Haaretz. So this is the story again. Got on this subject, but it's an important one. So, so the Jewish Agency, which is kind of the Aliyah organization, actually wanted to let them come in, but the Interior Ministry determined that they couldn't come in. And it's probably again going to go to the Supreme Court. So this is about internal politics in Israel. The head of the interior minister, the head of the interior ministry, the interior minister of Israel, is part of the Shas party, which is the Orthodox Sephardic party. And he is definitely not going to let people who are not, by his terms, Orthodox come into the community. So none of this was surprising because that guy in particular was like, not that guy, but his party was no way going to allow this to happen. So this is, these are issues that are going on in Israel, which you don't usually hear about. But I mean,
I think that Israel would want more people to be, considered Jews in the world.
Unless they're going to be coming to Israel. And when it comes to that, then I have bad news for you. Part of it then becomes a somewhat racial issue, which I hate to say it, but it is. It's part of what we have around the world, which is sometimes there's a racist.
Israel's really right wing, correct?
Well, the government, the current government is supposed to be a blended government, center right and right. So yes, but what happens in this kind of unity government, we call it unity. There's always a coalition government. This government, the hope was it was going to be a little bit more centrist because the blue and white party is the partner in it. But they also did bring in these other little parties and they tried to make a really solid party. Turned out it didn't work anyways. The government, as you might know, is going to be going through another set of elections in the coming months. So it didn't work. But the idea was to have a really solid government where instead of having like 61 Knesset members, which is the minimum you need, to have more like 70 or 80 Knesset members. But it didn't matter. The coalition's already fallen apart. I mean, they already know they're having new elections. The people who, when you make these coalitions, what the government does is the prime minister, who this time, by the way, Netanyahu was supposed to be prime minister for 2 years, and then Benny Gantz was supposed to be prime minister for 2 years. So there's a power sharing between the two largest parties and then some smaller parties. But all the different parties who were part of the coalition, they all get portfolios. So they all get cabinet ministries. So it'd be like in our government, if the Secretary of Labor was a Democrat and the Secretary of the Interior was a Republican. And you'd have people, you'd be like, they can't be in the same government together, but they are. And their own portfolio controls, they get to control whatever portfolio they want. And so in this case, the person in charge of Aliyah is run by an Orthodox rabbi, basically. And so that's why it is what it is. Now, interestingly, the Secretary of Absorption, which is different than the Interior Minister, I know it's confusing, but they have an Aliyah minister you'd think would be able to decide this. The Aliyah minister is actually an Ethiopian Jewish woman who's from the centrist party. Panina Shato is her name. She's actually the first Ethiopian Jewish woman in a government as a cabinet position. She is Ethiopian, and you'd think, she doesn't really have any say over this. Deciding who's Jewish is not her call. It's the interior minister's call, and that is the reason that guy who's in charge wanted that position was so he could make such calls as this. So it is what it is, folks. It doesn't affect us a lot, but when we see these stories, when I see these stories, it's disappointing and makes me sad. But let's go to the Torah. I do want to show one other thing though, since we started talking about movies. I was going to show. Maybe I'll show it at the end. One of the great movies of all time, I think, on the Bible. To me, actually, one of, if not the best Bible movie, actually was a cartoon, which I know is kind of funny to say, but Prince of Egypt, which was...
Oh, it was a fantastic movie.
Yeah, and it was, believe it or not, it was done 20 years ago. It was
that long ago now, huh?
It was the first cartoon animation, first animation done, I should say cartoon, first animation done by DreamWorks. It was right when DreamWorks came out. It was one of their first films. I think it was their second or third film.
And Bugs Bunny played Moses, right?
No. Moses was voiced by Val Kilmer, right? And Sandra Bullock played Miriam, and Michelle Pfeiffer was Deborah. So actually, mostly Gentiles that played the characters were the voices of the characters. Jeff Goldblum as Aaron was one of the few Jews in it. But the music, the song for it, When You Believe, ended up winning the Oscar, the Academy Award for Best Song that year. And that was sung by Whitney Houston, Mariah Carey, and somebody else. And it was really one of the best movies ever made. And again, it really adhered to the text, really adhered to the text. And it was also partly because it was animated. They were able to do a beautiful version of the special effects for the plagues and for the crossing of the sea. And it really was phenomenal. So again, everyone who's really tried to do this has had a hard time dealing with the text. But interestingly, they did a really good job. And of course, a lot of people say the greatest biblical epic is the Ten Commandments. DeMille's Ten Commandments. As many people know, it was actually the third version of the Ten Commandments that he directed. He did silent versions of the film. He loved the story and he wanted to make a blockbuster. And many people say he made one of the greatest blockbusters, epic, blockbusters of all time with the Ten Commandments, which, believe it or not, is actually now 65 years old, I think, this year, or 66 years. So it was an amazing movie when it came out. Obviously, people used to go on the Universal Studios tour and want to go through the Party to the Red Sea. So this is a time to think about biblical epics. It's also time to think about music, because we call this Shabbat Shirah, this Shabbat when we do the Song of the Sea. It's also always corresponds with Tu B'Shvat, which it is officially tonight, the New Year of the Trees. And we think about nature and how beautiful nature is and how beautiful the trees are. And of course, there's a connection between them, the rabbis say, because the trees are needed so that the birds that are God's singers have a place to stay, to live. And so the trees are connected to the songs through the birds. And at this time of year, a lot of times we see birds migrating, and the midrash is that the birds sang along with the people when we cross the Sea of Reeds. So let's read it, and let's think about the Song of the Sea, and let's look at the text. So folks, we're reading Beshallach, which is, believe it or not, as we make our exodus, as we make our way through the story, many people would say this is the story. This is the story of freedom, and the story that the Bible kind of is built around, in a way. You never want to say it's the most important story, but some people say this is in fact the most important story in humanity. And so let's take a look. And so it begins, Vayihi Beshallach, when Pharaoh let the people go, which is, again, Beshallach is another way of saying when he sent the people out. Shalach means to send too. When he let the people go, God did not lead them by the way of the land of the Philistines, although it was nearer. For God said that people may have a change of heart when they see war and return to Egypt. So interestingly enough, they do in fact have a change of heart all the time. They have three changes of heart before we even finish this Torah portion. But I'm not exaggerating. It might be more than three. You'll see three at least. But it's the fear that they would have when they were in battle that really, God says, is too much for them. And so the way that they go is not the most direct way. And it is a roundabout way up through the desert and up along the Dead Sea. And so that was the way we were supposed to go in, which you'll see the next 40 years is the way we go in. So God led the people roundabout by the way of the wilderness at the Sea of Reeds, which again could also be read the Red Sea. Now the Israelites went up armed out of the land of Egypt. So even if they weren't supposed to go into battle, they go into battle, ready for battle. They go in dressed for battle. And by the way, they will fight a battle by the end of the Torah portion. So if they didn't want to fight a battle, or God didn't want them to fight a battle, they fight a battle. But not only are they armed, they have with them the bones of Joseph. Because Moses took with him the bones of Joseph, who had exacted an oath from the children of Israel, saying, God will be sure to take notice of you. Then you shall carry up my bones from here with you. Now, we read about this several weeks ago, about 4 weeks ago. We read about Joseph doing exactly this thing. Promise me that you will carry my bones out. And so people here fulfill an oath, which is a really important thing. That it's an oath that their fathers made, and really their grandfathers and great grandfathers made. This is a promise that's been handed down for generations, which is kind of amazing when you think about a promise that you don't fulfill, but that your grandchildren or great grandchildren fulfill. It's pretty wild. It's a pretty amazing idea that people will honor that promise. Again, gets back to the question, why did Joseph have to wait so long to be buried in Israel? Why couldn't he be buried after he died? Anybody want to jump in there with why didn't Joseph get to be buried in Israel like his dad did? Because remember, Jacob dies in Egypt, and they carry him back to Israel. They bury him back in the cave. Anybody want to go here with this? Anybody? No?
Does it anything at all to do with Joseph's relationship with the Pharaoh and how powerful he was?
Yeah, exactly. One of the, I think, kind of the most articulated theories is that he couldn't leave because Pharaoh wouldn't let him leave, and not even leave when he's dead.
Yeah.
So to some extent, Joseph became a good luck charm for the Egyptians, that as long as he was there, they were so worried that when he would leave, even his bones would leave, that everything would go to hell. Now, of course, it does go to hell, even with the bones being there, but that's because God tells them, to let the people go, and they don't. And so we have to go through this whole punishment cycle. They needed to be punished. But this idea that somehow that Joseph would protect them, that Joseph's bones would protect him, is an interesting idea.
Rabbi?
Yeah.
Am I making things up or dreaming things? But didn't we read that Joseph was actually mummified?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
We read that. Jacob was mummified too. But it says that Joseph, that is the last words exactly of Genesis. The last words are Joseph was mummified and he was buried in Egypt. And that's the last words of Genesis. Now, again, it's kind of amazing to think that Joseph's bones are that powerful. But it also, interestingly, consider this for a second. As Moses is leading the people for the next 40 years, for most of those 40 years, the Israelites are carrying two arks with them. They're carrying the Ark of the Covenant, and they're carrying the Ark of Joseph's bones. Now, if you want to say, well, where do you get that from? Well, I get it from this. It says that they carried his bones. The word that we have for a casket in Hebrew is an aron. Aron. Cabinet or a casket or a box. You want to use all the different words we use for it in English. But an aron is a case, cabinet. It's the same word for casket, and it's the same word we have for the ark. The Aron HaKodesh, we still call it the Holy Ark. That's where we keep our Torah, in the Aron. But it's the same word for casket. So if you go, if you look up the word Aron in Hebrew, it has those meanings: casket, ark, and we call the ark where we keep the Torah, we call it an ark, even though it's oftentimes not a cabinet, but an elaborate structure with doors. But we still call it an Aron, the Aron HaKodesh, the Holy Ark. So it's interesting to think that was with the people for the 40 years there in the wilderness.
But also, Rabbi, isn't it true that isn't this the only time that's actually in the Torah that in Exodus that it mentions Joseph's bones?
It is the only time. Yeah, I don't. It's not. It's not mentioned again. But again, it's not. It's not. I mean, the consequence of this is that some people were in charge of carrying his bones for the next 40 years, and it was a generational obligation to remember, to bury him, and then once he's taken out, it becomes a generational obligation to get him to the Holy Land. It's an amazing thing when you really think about it. Anyway, so let's read about this journey. They set out from Sukkot, and they encamped at Etam on the edge of the wilderness. And the Lord went before them in a pillar of cloud by day to guide them along the way, and in a pillar of fire by night to give them light, that they might travel day and night. So again, they could travel at night, they could travel during the day, they could travel in bad weather and good weather. They had God always with them. The pillar of cloud was by day and the pillar of fire by night did not depart from before the people. And so the Torah is pretty clear that they had a sign that God was there all the time. So that's amazing when you consider. So, we talk about the miracles that we've already seen and the plagues. We know about the miracles that we're about to read, the most famous miracle, the most public miracle, splitting of the Sea of Reeds, Red Sea, most public and powerful miracle. But yet every single day, the Israelites were in the presence of a miracle, of God's presence, of seeing that.
It's a bigger miracle almost.
Every day. So
it's unbelievable.
The idea that the people didn't have faith in God, and all they had to do was look up. All they had to do was look up and see the pillar, and they knew that there was God right in front of them. They didn't care. At a certain point, that miracle was just the way things were. And so I was talking to our kids about this when we studied a little earlier today. People say, I'll believe in God if I saw a miracle, of course I'd believe in God. I said, really? Do you think you would? Because the Torah tells us that people who see miracles every day, they don't believe in God either. They don't have faith. The miracle itself doesn't help you believe it. It doesn't, because essentially what they wanted, what I want, what you want, what everybody wants from God is to be a genie, to be able to say, God, grant me my wishes so that I can have what I want. And when we don't have that, then we start to think, well, maybe there isn't a God. Maybe there's no God. Because first of all, it's a lot easier to live in a world where there's no God. Because remember, if there's a God, there's actually responsibility. There's actually accountability. And so the idea that there is no God is really easy and really desirable most of the time, except when we want something. And then it becomes, please God, give me what I want. The reality is that we can look at God every day if we looked in the mirror and we realize that we're a miracle that shouldn't be here. And so the idea that we need to have miracles in front of us, which again, every single person that you look at is in itself a miracle. I mean, scientists have said, if you understand what the chances are, the probability that life at all would exist on Earth, that matter would ever be brought into existence in the first place. I'm talking about scientists who study the Big Bang. They'll tell you it doesn't really quite make sense, the probability for these things. And so when you add up all the probability for existence, for life to exist on Earth, for human life to exist on Earth, for your life, for your one fertilized egg to exist, the probability for you is so small that anyone who didn't win the lottery, the Mega Millions or the Powerball the last couple of days, which I guess is all of us, you've already won the lottery because the probability of your existence was far smaller. So the idea that a miracle needs to happen for me to believe is kind of ridiculous because you already have the miracle. The problem again is that that's not what people want to hear. That's not what people want to see. It's much easier to have the discussion outside of the reality, the biggest reality of all, which is you. So the people have a pillar of cloud, a pillar of fire. They have God all around them. And we're going to see it doesn't matter. The Lord, so we go into chapter 14. The Lord said to Moses, tell the Israelites to turn back and encamp before Pi Hahirot, between Migdol and the sea, before Baal Zephon. You shall encamp facing it by the sea. So God tells Moses, your first stop by the sea is right there at the sea. You literally go there. You're going to stay by the beach. Really nice. You got to camp out by the beach. But Moses learns Pharaoh will save the Israelites. They are astray in the land. The wilderness is closed in on them. Then I will stiffen Pharaoh's heart, and he will pursue them, that I may gain glory through Pharaoh and all his host, and the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord. And they did so. When the king of Egypt was told that the people had fled, he told them to go. Pharaoh and his courtiers had a change of heart about the people and said, what is this that we have done, releasing Israel from our service? He changed their mind. So he ordered his chariot and took his men with him. He took 600 of his picked chariots and the rest of the chariots of Egypt with officers in all of them. So he takes his army and he takes the best of his army and he takes 600 chariots, which if that is, again, if those numbers are accurate, and they could be, by the way, 600 chariots was enormous. It was an enormous army and an enormous show of military force. And to understand what 600 chariots would have been like in the ancient world, it would be something that nobody would have ever seen before. Most countries didn't have 10 chariots, let alone 600 chariots. Remember that when this happened 3,300 years ago, most of Europe was still living in the Stone Age, in the sense that the idea of these people in England and France and Germany and Italy and Greece, the idea of these people having chariots would have been to the extent that most of them were wearing animal skins and hunter-gatherer societies that would have seen the chariots of Egypt like extraterrestrials. It would have been the same as if people today looking at a fighter jet going over them when they literally are riding around on horseback or with spears. That's how advanced this was compared to where most of the world was. So this is not a little thing. And it is very possible that the Egyptians at one point had 600 chariots. But again, around the rest of the world, this wasn't even, you couldn't even consider it. Even the Babylonians and Assyrians at this point wouldn't have had 600 chariots. This was the biggest army and most powerful army at the time. And based on what we know, that is very, very possible. It's very possible that this is what the Egyptians had. It says the Lord stiffened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and he gave chase to the Israelites as the Israelites were departing defiantly. The Egyptians gave chase to them, and all the chariot horses of Pharaoh, his horsemen, and his warriors overtook them and camped by the sea, near Pi Hahirot, before Baal Zephon. So the Egyptians come to where the Israelites are by the sea. So people forget about this part of the miracle, which is the part where they are surrounded by the Egyptians on one side and the sea on the other, and there is no place to go. As Pharaoh drew near, the Israelites caught sight of the Egyptians advancing upon them. Greatly frightened, the Israelites cried out to the Lord. And they said to Moses, was it for want of graves that you brought us out to die in the wilderness? What have you done to us, taking us out of Egypt? What have you done to us, taking us out of Egypt? Is this not the very thing we told you in Egypt, saying, let us be, and we will serve the Egyptians? Or it is better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness. So again, these are the people that are looking up and can see a pillar of fire or a cloud, depending on the time of day, but it's an angel. It's God manifesting. They just experienced 10 plagues, which were just a miracle after a miracle. And yet here they're saying, we should have left. We made a mistake. You made a mistake taking us out of Egypt. So this is the first time. Count it, because it's going to happen a few more times. The people say, we never should have left. Disappointing, but very human. So when people say, is this true? I say, oh, 100% this is true, because this is what people do. People say to God, what have you done for me lately? And not only that, I cannot understand, God, how you've put me in this situation. Moses said to the people, have no fear. Stand by and witness the deliverance which the Lord will work for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you will never see again. The Lord will battle for you. You hold your peace. Which is a little bit, it's a little bit not what the translation is. What he really said to them is, shut up. The Lord will fight for you. Now shut up. Enough. Don't say another word. Shush. Be quiet. And you don't have to do anything. You don't have anything to do. Sit back and watch what's going to happen. Then the Lord said to Moses, why do you cry out to me? Tell the Israelites to go forward. Now that's an interesting scene, because God seems to want the people to do something themselves. And so as much as it seems as though God is going to fight for them, I'm not ruining the story. You know what happens. God does an amazing miracle here. God wants the people to do something. And this is why we have this midrash that the people actually had to take a step into the sea, that the people actually had to show their faith in order for God to do something. We don't know exactly what happens in that moment, because God tells Moses, you do something. You lift up your rod and hold out your arm over the sea and split it, so that the Israelites may march into the sea on dry ground. And I will stiffen the hearts of the Egyptians so that they go in after them. And I will gain glory through Pharaoh and all his warriors, his chariots and his horsemen. By the way, keep in mind Pharaoh, because it's a really interesting question. What happens to Pharaoh? Let the Egyptians know that I am the Lord. When I gain glory through Pharaoh, his chariots and his horsemen. And here it says, the angel of God who had been going ahead of the Israelite army, so that pillar of fire, pillar of cloud, now moved and followed behind them. And the pillar of cloud shifted from in front of them and took place behind them. So that's another part of the miracle, is that the cloud creates a wall to keep the Egyptians away from them. And it came between the army of the Egyptians and the army of Israel. Thus, I wouldn't, by the way, necessarily translate it as army. I would translate it as camp, because it's not the army of Israel, it's all of Israel. It's the camp Machaneh, which is the camp. So the Egyptian encampment and the Israelite encampment are now separated by the pillar. Thus there was the cloud with the darkness, and it cast a spell upon the night, so that no one could come out and couldn't see the other all through the night. Then Moses held out his arm over the sea, and the Lord drove back the sea with a strong east wind all that night, and turned the sea into dry ground. The waters were split, and the Israelites went into the sea on dry ground, the waters forming a wall for them on their right and on their left. Now again, I want to say this before someone jumps in and says, but what about the fact that this took all night? What about the fact that it sounds like maybe the water just went down and receded? It does say the water receded. It does say that there was dry ground for them to walk on. But the Torah also says that there was literally a wall of water on both sides of them. It wasn't on one side. It says there was a wall on the right and on the left. There was a wall of water on the sides. Yeah. Joyce, you want to say something too?
No, I'm just imagining the walls on both of water on both sides.
This is one of the things that the movies, this is one of the things that the movies have not adequately done until actually the Prince of Egypt. Look, DeMille did it because you have this wonderful image of the sea parting, and the tour buses used to drive through it. I don't know if they still do it at Universal Studios, that you could drive through the sea and you get to experience it yourself. And it was a great special effect when it happened. When DeMille, did that, it was considered one of the great special effects ever on film. But it doesn't capture what the wall of water was like. Finally, in the movie The Prince of Egypt, they did, because what it shows is the people walking through and literally seeing clear water on the sides, where they can literally see the fish swimming in the water on the sides of them. Now that is what a wall of water, to me, I assume that that's what it looks like. It literally is. This is not something that can be explained by science. So, did it happen this way? We don't know. The Midrash even plays around with it, that there wasn't one wall of water, that there were 12 walls of water, or 12 sets of walls of water for each of the tribes, that each tribe had their own path. So the miracle was even more impressive because there was paths for the tribes to walk through. Look, to imagine this, again, we are supposed to try to imagine it. We are supposed to try to visualize it like Joyce is doing, and to try to see through their eyes what this miracle was like, and to understand that the final miracle that's done in the Exodus, is a miracle of amazing power, and, as we're about to see, amazing destruction. Because as they're walking through, the Egyptians come in pursuit of them into the sea, all of Pharaoh's horses, chariots, and horsemen. And at the morning watch, the Lord looked down on the Egyptian army from the pillar of fire and cloud, and threw the Egyptian army into panic. He locked the wheels of the chariots so that they moved forward with difficulty. And the Egyptians said, "Let us flee from the Israelites, for the Lord is fighting for them against Egypt." So the Egyptians follow them in. According to this, it's close in the sense that the Egyptians can come in and start chasing them. And what stops them isn't the fact that the Israelites are actually out of the water yet, but that when they go into the water to go after them, their wheels lock and they're stuck in the middle of the sea. And it's at that point that they start to go crazy. It's at that part that the Egyptians start to panic. And again, the question, where's Pharaoh? Is Pharaoh here or not? Then the Lord said to Moses, "Hold out your arm over the sea, that the waters may come back on the Egyptians and upon the chariots and on their horsemen." And Moses held out his arm over the sea, and at daybreak, the sea returned to its normal state. And the Egyptians fled at its approach. But the Lord hurled the Egyptians into the sea. So what's interesting about that, if you really read the miracle completely, is that some of the Egyptians may have gotten out of the water and God put them back into the water. So if they did get out, they got thrown in. So they all got washed away. The waters turned back and covered the chariots and the horsemen. Pharaoh's entire army that followed them into the sea, not one of them remained. But the Israelites had marched through the sea on dry ground, the waters forming a wall on their right and left. Now, let's just read this last line. Thus the Lord delivered Israel that day from the Egyptians. Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the shore of the sea, which means the Israelites could see the bodies of the Egyptians on the other side. And when Israel saw the wondrous power which the Lord had wielded against the Egyptians, the people feared the Lord. They had faith in the Lord and his servant Moses. A happy ending. for about 5 minutes. I'm not joking. But they see the bodies of the Egyptians on the other side of the water. So their bodies come out of the water and they see them on the other side. So they see that there's no one who's going to chase them anymore. At least Egyptians aren't going to chase them anymore. So we're about to see some other people chase them. So Pharaoh's army gets destroyed. It's the final act of punishment, that Pharaoh's army gets taken away from him. So everything the Pharaoh had, including, by the way, we assume couldn't have been much worse than losing his eldest child. His heir to the throne died in the 10th plague, right? So he lost his child, and he also lost now his army. So he's lost everything. It's an interesting question. What happened to Pharaoh? What happened to him? Now, for those of you who are great students of the Ten Commandments, the movie, The 10 Commandments, Yul Brynner doesn't die. He's on the other side of the, he can't go in, lead his army. Something happens to his chariot. He doesn't go in. He doesn't follow. He doesn't lead. And so he doesn't get washed away, but he sees it happen. He's a witness to it. We don't know. The Torah is not clear as to what happens to Pharaoh himself. There is no, and Pharaoh, you just read it. It doesn't say. So did that Pharaoh die that day? Maybe. There are midrashim, there are stories that, yes, indeed, that Pharaoh went underwater. And there's even a midrash that horrible, horrible Pharaoh, who's so bad, is such a bad killer of people that God forbid he should die right away, that he's still underneath the water and he's in a perpetual state of drowning. He can never come up for air. God keeps him alive, drowning underneath the water to make up for all the Israelite babies that he drowned. It's kind of like, the Hitler punishment, how do you punish somebody who's, responsible for genocide? So that's where you get the midrash on Pharaoh there. But the other possibility that he lived is equally, well, not equally, but it's fascinating to think about that. What if this guy actually now has to live with the knowledge that everything he ever had was taken away? DeMille does something interesting in the movie. In the movie, his wife goads him into chasing Moses because of their kid dying. And when she finds out that he let them go, she says, how could you have let him go? How could you have let this man who killed your son, our son, go? And so she goads him into it. And so in the end, when Pharaoh comes back, when Yul Brynner comes back and everything's been destroyed, he sits on the throne and they don't talk. They literally, the final scene of Yul Brynner in the movie is the two of them looking straight ahead, not talking to each other, with kind of the understanding that they didn't have a really good relationship anymore after that. So is that possible? We don't know. The reality is that the Torah doesn't tell us what happens to Pharaoh. So that's the end of the story. But it's not the end of the story, because that's only the narrative. Chapter 14 is the end of the narrative, but chapter 15 is the Song of the Sea. And I love this because in this case, people talk about the authorship, and of course, Friedman writes about the authorship of the Bible and who wrote the Bible, and then he writes about it in this book, the Exodus. But what's interesting about this is whether or not there are different authors, there are two different vantage points of this story, which is a narrative point and a prose part, and then the poem part, the song part. That's what we're going to read now. So there's two different versions of it in the Torah itself, and there's an acknowledgement that there's two different versions of it. For the people who study the Bible as literature and as a book and as with writers and trying to understand how it was composed, there is almost unanimous agreement that one of the oldest parts of the Bible, period, is this song. And the theory that many people have is that the narrative that we just read was based on the song. And the song existed first, and the narrative is the version of the way people wrote about this song, not necessarily knowing that you'd ever see the two next to each other. So just keep that in mind too. But remember that this is a poem, a song, a saga, and maybe this existed because people sang and told poems before they had books, and before they wrote things down. So keep that in mind. And again, the language in this is poetic. It's poetry, which means there's rhyme, there's alliteration, there's metaphor, and it's a different style, and it's difficult to read it as literally as we do with the text, which is also maybe sometimes a problem. But here, remember, this is a song. And it says that Moses and the Israelites sang this song to the Lord. They said, I will sing to the Lord for his triumph gloriously. Ashir al Adonai ki ga'o ga'a. I will sing to God. Ashir al Adonai ki ga'o ga'a, because he's triumphed for us. Horse and driver he has hurled into the sea. The Lord is my strength and might. He has become my deliverance. This is my God, and I will enshrine him. God of my father, and I will exalt him. Remember the biblical doublet, the repetition of one idea in one part of the line, and the wording first, and then another synonyms, set of synonyms next. The Lord, the warrior, the Lord is his name. Pharaoh's chariots and his army he has cast into the sea, and the pick of his officers are drowned in the sea of reeds. The deep covered them. They went down into the depths like stone. Again, the repetition style, it's the style of biblical poetry. Your right hand, O Lord, glorious in power. Your right hand, O Lord, shatters the foe. In your great triumph, you break your opponents. You send forth your fury. It consumes them like straw. At the blast of your nostrils, the waters piled up. The floods stood straight like a wall. The deeps froze in the heart of the sea. The foe said, I will pursue and overtake. I will divide the spoil. My desire shall have its fill of them. I will bear my sword. My hand will subdue them. You made your wind blow. The sea covered them. They sank like lead in the majestic waters. And here in verse 11, we have the words, Mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai, Mi kamocha ne'edar ba'kodesh, Nara tehilot, osei fele. And that's the way it would have been sung. Who is like you, O Lord, among the celestials? Who is like you, majestic in holiness, awesome in splendor, working wonders? Nora tehilot osei fele, which is again awesome, beautiful, and working wonders, working miracles. The words Mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai, which became part of our daily liturgy that we say in the morning and in the evening, not just on Shabbat, not just on holidays, but every day. In the morning and in the evening, we sing these words as part of the prayers of the Shema. The last parts of the prayers are the prayers of Geulah, of redemption. And every time we say this prayer, again, twice a day, we say these words that our ancestors sang. Who is like you, God? Now the phrase is a strange one, by the way. I'm not gonna hold back in my, again, complete acknowledgement. It's a strange phrase. Because to some extent, is it an acknowledgement that there are other gods? I mean, of course, we would say no. It's a poetic form. It's poetic. There's nothing like God. But the phrase literally says, what God is like you? What God can measure up amongst the gods? Because that's what the words Ba'elim means. It means Elohim. It means gods. It's the plural of El, of gods. So Translated as celestials because it's kind of less problematic. It adheres more to monotheism to use the word celestial, because Elim could include the angels, it can include subsidiary divine entities. But literally Elim means gods. And that's why it's oftentimes translated as, when you look at literal Bible translations, it'll say, who is like you, God, amongst all the gods? But again, for people who lived amongst other people who believed in a multitude of gods, it would be very natural for the Jewish people to say, there's no God like our God. Any of the gods that you talk about, that you make up, are not real. So this is a poetic way of saying there is no God but God. And so mi kamocha, which is the repetition of that idea, what other thing is like you in holiness? What else is like you that can do these kinds of things? So, I believe that even in the ancient world, the Jewish people understood that there was only one God, that any other God is a made up fiction, and that they don't do things like this. They don't redeem a people. A God who helps one people or one person, but not a God who's the God of a whole nation, not a God who literally redeemed a whole nation. And so this is something that they recognize is unique. And it becomes part of our prayer every day. We're supposed to say that every single day, twice a day. You put your right hand, the earth swallowed them. In your love, you lead the people, you redeemed. In your strength, you guide them to your holy abode. The peoples here, they tremble. Agony grips the dwellers in Philistia. Now are the clans of Edom dismayed. The tribes of Moab, trembling grips them. All the dwellers in Canaan are aghast. Terror and dread descend upon them. Through the might of your arm, they are still a stone. Till your people cross over, O Lord, till your people cross whom you have ransomed. And so this is a statement against all the other peoples that the Israelites are going to come into contact with in the land of Canaan and in that area. Not all of them, but the main ones. The Ammonites aren't mentioned. The Midianites aren't mentioned here. The Philistines are, the Edomites, and the Moabites, and the dwellers in Canaan, which we again would say the Canaanites. Those main peoples are mentioned here. And it's basically, again, when they hear what you've done to the Egyptians, they're going to be scared to death. This is set, again, everybody into fear. You will bring them and plant them in your mountain, the place you made to dwell in, O Lord, the sanctuary, O Lord, which your hands establish. Adonai yimloch leolam va'ed. And that part is also in our prayers. The Lord will reign forever and ever. For the horses of Pharaoh with his chariots and horsemen went into the sea. The Lord turned back on them the waters of the sea. But the Israelites marched on dry ground in the midst of the sea. And so that's the kernel. That phrase is the kernel on which any of the narrative is based. And now we get an interesting part of the song. Or let's put it this way. That may have been the last part of the song. Because now it says, then Miriam the prophetess, Aaron's sister, took a timbrel in her hand, and all the women went out after her and danced with timbrels. And Miriam chanted for them, sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. Horse and driver, he has hurled into the sea. So this now goes back to the narrative. And the narrative says that Miriam the prophetess, Aaron's sister, took a timbrel in her hand and led the women. So is this a separate version of that? Or do we have a differing account of who led the people in song? Or were there two groups of people singing, and Miriam led the women and Moses led the men? We don't know. But what's interesting is that the Torah says that she led them into the song of Shiro Ladonai ki gaoga, which is the first line of the song. Sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. So it quotes the song itself in that line. So the narrative has the poem in it. So, we're left with an interesting situation, which is they could be read different ways. Some people like to say that Moses and Miriam led the people in song, and want to make sure that our poems and our liturgy, our songs, maintain that it is that Moses and Miriam both led the people in song. So when we look at the Mi Chamocha prayer, it says that Moses led them in song. And the Reform movement, and I think now many conservative synagogues have added the words Moshe Miriam, that Moses and Miriam, led the people in song, because the Torah does say that Miriam led them in song. That's not a midrash. That's not a legend. That's not a rabbinic insertion or addition. It says so in the Torah that Miriam chanted that, and sang for them. So, she sang that song too. She either sang that song too, or it's her song. Not exactly sure. I will tell you, there are arguments to be made for it's Miriam's song. Friedman actually makes the case that it's actually Miriam's song, that it's not Moses' song, that originally it was Miriam's song, and that when the song was put back in the Bible, or when the song was in the Bible, if you look at the beginning of the chapter, then Moses and the Israelites sang this song. They said, if you take out this line, Az Yashir Moshe V'nei Yisrael, et Hashirah Hazot, you just look at where the song begins, Ashir al Adonai ki gaoga, which is the line that it says that Miriam sang. If you take out that line, then the person who inserted this song says that Moses sang the song, whereas the way that it originally is that everyone knew that song, and it's the song of Miriam. One of the ways that maybe makes sense is that the other really, really, really old part of the Bible that we have, and it's interestingly and not coincidentally, the Haftarah that we read this week is something we call the Song of Deborah. And it's from the book of Judges. And it's the song that Deborah leads the people in when they beat the Canaanites during the time of Judges, during her time of leading the people. And what's interesting about that is that's also a song from a woman. And so it is very possible that these songs were attributed to these great biblical women. And at some point, the song was appropriated by the men who said, no, that's Moses' song. It wasn't Miriam's song. It was Moses' song. Is it possible? Maybe, but we have both versions. We have both in the text that Moses and Miriam led the people in the song. And that's what we have. And it's difficult to say for sure, but those are both possibilities. That it was a song of Miriam originally only, or it was a song for both. And so the next line says, Moses caused Israel to set out from the Sea of Reeds.
Rabbi Mark, I'm sorry. Why do they just refer to Miriam as Aaron's sister, not Moses's?
Sandy, it's a great question. It's not the only time that happens. It's an interesting, I'm laughing because it's such a great question. It's a question that gets to the root of why would Miriam and Aaron be given credit for a song that we also have credit just to Moses on? And it doesn't say Moses and Aaron led the people in the song. It says Moses and the Israelites. Look, the theory goes is that Aaron is given a lot of credit by one of the authors of the Bible who is a descendant of Aaron, a Cohen. And as such, Aaron is oftentimes given, I wouldn't say more credit than Moses, but given credit in some places where Moses is ignored consciously. And if that's the case, so we've talked about this a little bit before in the past. There is something that goes on in the Bible, and you can see it in the Bible if you read it really carefully, that the Israelites moved from a situation where the Levites made the decisions for the people to a time when the Kohanim, the priests, the descendants of Aaron, made the call for the people. And that was a major shift. And something like this actually might show us that rivalry, there was a time when that rivalry was still very much alive. And so when someone asserts that Moses led the people in a song and someone else says, no, that was a song of Miriam, and not only was it Miriam, but it's Miriam who's Aaron's sister, that you actually can see in there a very conscious desire to make one person more powerful than the other. And so that those instances are actually keys to understanding the rivalry between the Kohanim and the Levites. And that it was a major power shift because the Levites, for a long time in the Bible or during the biblical period, were the ones who called the shots. And at a certain time, the Kohanim asserted themselves and said, no, only the Kohanim can make sacrifices. Only the Kohanim can lead the people. And remember, the Kohanim are based in Jerusalem. The Levites are everywhere. They're all throughout Israel. But the Kohanim are only in Jerusalem. So you essentially have a Jerusalem-based group of priests who claim, again, I mean, the idea is that they are part of the Levites, but they're at a certain point, the Levites can do all the sacrifices and then they can't. Then only Kohanim can do them. And by the way, I just want to point out that at a certain point, not even the Kohanim can do them. Only certain parts of the Kohanim can do the sacrifices. So I think that there's an important idea to keep in mind here, which is that there was a point in time in Jewish history, in the Bible, early parts of the Bible, when maybe there were enough Israelites, the Levites were big enough to minister to the people. And at a certain point, no, it's just going to be Kohanim. And because it's a small, the Levites are too many, there's too many Levites, the Kohanim are small enough to minister to the people. And then there's a problem generations later that there's too many Kohanim. We can only let some of the Kohanim minister to the people. And that's much, much later, even into the period of the Maccabees, where it's only the Chazmonim, it's only that sub-group of Kohanim that get to be the priests. And there were by that time, there were rival priests that were offering sacrifices that were Kohanim that were offering in different places. So it's interesting to think about this from the standpoint of like, why would this happen? Because you got a problem when you have, exponential growth of a people that, there's not enough jobs. There's not enough room for everybody to do their job. And so you have to whittle down who's going to actually do that. So you can say, oh, this group of people is doing it. Well, not only this part of that group because there's so many of them. And then it's only this part of that group because there's so many of them. So you get to a problem where I think, that's what happened. Now, I will tell you, there's a little bit of a problem here, which is that the Kohanim 100% believed that they were descendants of Aaron. And I'm not denying that fact. I don't know that that's not the case. But it's also the case that the Kohanim, and all this is documented, by the way, I mean, what I'm telling you, the part that's not, everything that I just told you is all documented. The way that only certain priests could function. I mean, you have Aaron, and then you have only the Tzadokim, only the Sadducees of Aaron's family, and then of the Tzadokim, you only have the Hasmonim. I mean, that's all documented in Jewish history. I mean, and actually, it's documented. What I'm going to tell you now is not documented, but it is a possibility. And that is that the tradition of Aaron being the ancestor of the Kohanim and also being the brother of Moses may have been an attempt for people to bring those two groups together, the Levites and the Kohanim. It is also a possibility because you remember I told you about the genetics? The genetics of the Levites and the genetics of the Kohanim are not identical. You heard me right. That's one of the places where genetics do not bear out the biblical account. And by the way, I will say the biblical account of the Israelites, of the Levites being a subgroup and the Kohanim being a subgroup of that group. What the Torah tells us about the rivalry between the Levites and the Kohanim is actually borne out by the genetics, by the DNA. What's not borne out is that Moses and Aaron were necessarily, that there was a common ancestry of both the Levites and the Kohanim. That isn't borne out by the DNA. It might be, by the way, at some point, we might find a genetic link one day between the Levites and the Kohanim that will say, yes, this Levite was the ancestor of the Kohanim. We don't have that yet. And we may never find that, by the way. And that doesn't mean that it's not true. What I will tell you is that the DNA evidence that we have right now does prove that a common ancestor for the Kohanim lived around the time that Aaron would have lived. So that is the case. Just remember that. That we do have in the DNA. So somebody who lived about 3,200 years ago was a common ancestor for the Kohanim. The DNA also
they have the same DNA. They're brothers.
Correct. That's where I said we don't have that DNA. Now listen, the problem is, Sandy, we don't have Moses's DNA. Moses was a Levite, that's no question, right? That's what the Torah says. Moses was a Levite and that Moses was Aaron's brother. The problem is we don't have a common DNA between the Levites and the Kohanim yet. And if we don't find it, it means that the story of Moses and Aaron being brothers was invented to bring those two groups together, and that the Levites were a common ancestor for the Kohanim. If we don't find that DNA, it wouldn't actually surprise me, because those stories of the unification of the two of them, or that the Kohanim came from the Levites, is what the Kohanim would have wanted to have, which is an ancestry back to Moses's brother Aaron, or to Aaron. If that doesn't happen, then the Kohanim become powerful as a group and become the priests and take that power, and are given that power by King David. I mean, King David makes them in charge, but at what expense? And it was definitely at the expense of the Levites. So that means that Moses is part of the family, and all the other people who are Levites also are kind of they're kind of cut out of it. Again, if you want to read the book on Exodus, which is the one that Friedman just wrote, there's a really good explanation of it. He doesn't invent this theory. He doesn't, but he writes it really easily to read. It's very readable. And it'll make sense to you when you read it, why people would have done this, which is to try to keep the people unified on one hand, but also to explain why Levites are descendant from Moses and are Aaron's people too, but kind of get cut out of the power. So that's why. And again, Sandy, you hit right on it, which is why Aaron? Why not Moses' sister? Why not Moses' and Aaron's sister? But it's not the only time that we see it. It's not the only place where we get Miriam as Aaron's sister. Oh, so let's read this now. When Moses, so it says, then Moses caused Israel to set out from the Sea of Reeds. They went to the wilderness of Shur. They traveled 3 days in the wilderness, and they found no water. They come to Marah, and they could not drink the water of Marah because it was bitter, which is the word Marah. It means like maror. It means bitter. That's the name of the place. And the people grumbled against Moses, saying, what shall we drink? So he cried out to the Lord. And again, this is now the second time in this one portion that they're complaining. So he cried out to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a piece of wood. He threw it into the water, and the water became sweet. There he made for them a fixed rule, and he put it, and he, meaning God, put them to the test. And he said, if you will heed the Lord your God diligently, doing what is upright in his sight, giving ear to his commandments, and keeping all his laws, which you haven't gotten yet, but you'll get them, then I will not bring upon you any of the diseases that I brought upon the Egyptians. For I am the Lord your healer. I am God Rephoecha. I am your healer. God the healer. They came to Elim, and there were 12 springs of water and 70 palm trees, which is again a really nice oasis, and they encamped there beside the water. So it then says in chapter 16, so that's their next stop is Elim. So they were at Marah, now they're at Elim. They set out from Elim. The whole Israelite community came into the wilderness of Sin, Midbar Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai. So this is on the way to Sinai, on the 15th of the second month after their departure from the land of Egypt. So this is right around now. If they left during Nisan in the springtime, this is now summertime. They're in the desert in summertime. In the wilderness, the whole Israelite community grumbled against Moses and Aaron. And again, they say, the Israelites said to them, if we had only died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the flesh pots, when we ate our fill of bread, for you have brought us to this wilderness to starve this whole congregation to death. So now we don't have food. You're killing us. You're killing us, Moses. And the Lord said to Moses, I will rain down bread for you from the sky, and the people shall go out and gather each day that day's portion, that I may thus test them. Again, a test, to see whether they'll follow my instructions or not. But on the sixth day, when they apportion what they've brought in, it shall prove to be double the amount they gather each day. So they don't have to gather on Shabbat. They get 2 portions on Friday. So Moses and Aaron said to all the Israelites, by evening you shall know it was the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt. Like you don't know before, now you'll know when you get your food today. And in the morning you shall behold the presence of the Lord, because he has heard your grumblings against the Lord. For who are we that you should grumble against us? So Moses and Aaron say, well, you're grumbling against God and you're going to see God. Since it is the Lord, Moses continued, who will give you flesh to eat in the evening and bread in the morning to the full, because the Lord has heard the grumblings you utter against him, what is our part? Your grumbling is not against us, but against the Lord. So you think you're talking about us? You're bad-mouthing God. It's not us, it's God. Then Moses said to Aaron, say to the Israelite community, advance toward the Lord, for he has heard grumbling. And as Aaron spoke to the whole Israelite community, they turned toward the wilderness, and there in a cloud appeared the presence of the Lord, which, by the way, seems wholly different. Seems wholly different than the cloud, the pillar of cloud or the pillar of fire. This is, in fact, the presence of the Lord. So this is something different. This says this is the kavod Adonai. This is the kavod of God. This is the presence of God. This is something even more divine. The Lord spoke to Moses, I've heard the grumbling of the Israelites. Speak to them and say, by evening you shall eat flesh, and in the morning you shall have your fill of bread, and you shall know that I, the Lord, am your God. In the evening, quail appeared and covered the camp. In the morning, there was a fall of dew about the camp. And when the dew lifted, there over the surface of the wilderness lay a fine and flaky substance, as fine as the frost on the ground. And when the Israelites saw it, they said to one another, "What is this? What is it?" Manhu, manhu, for they did not know what it was. And Moses said to them, "That is the bread which the Lord has given you to eat." And so they called it manhu, which is where you get the word manna. That is what the Lord has commanded. Gather as much of it as each of you requires to eat. An omer to a person, and it'll say what an omer is, by the way, because it seems to be an old measurement that the people who are reading this don't use anymore. An omer to a person for as many as there are of you. Each of you shall fetch for those in his tent. The Israelites did so, some gathering much, some little. But when they measured it by the omer, he who had gathered much had no excess, and he who gathered little had no deficiency. They had gathered as much as they needed to eat. So the miracle is the food is there. And then there's another miracle, which is however much they got was how much they needed. And Moses said to them, "Leave none of it over until morning. Let no one leave any of it over until morning," right? So don't hold on to it. But it says they paid no attention to Moses. Some of them left of it until morning, and it became infested with maggots and stank, and Moses was angry with them. So these people tried to gather extras, even though Moses said not to. Gather as much as you need. Don't leave any. Don't take extras. And they did, because they're human beings. And they couldn't follow directions. So by the way, they were given something to do. They were given a commandment, and they couldn't follow that commandment, which is do what Moses told you to do, or do what God told you to do through Moses. They couldn't do it. So Moses got angry with them. But it then says they gathered it every morning, each as much as he needed to eat. For when the sun grew hot, it would melt. So again, we don't really know what manna is or was. The Torah says it's clearly a miracle. Some people say it was based on the description, that it was some kind of larva or some kind of bug that would go onto when the frost or the dew was on the ground, that this thing was there on it, and it was a spore or some kind of insect, and that they could pick up that insect, and it was a protein source. We don't know. We'll have a little bit of description of this coming up. But we do know it says it would melt when in the heat. On the sixth day, they gathered double the amount of food for food, 2 omers for each. And when all the chieftains of the community came and told Moses, he said to them, "This is what the Lord meant. Tomorrow is a day of rest, a holy Sabbath of the Lord. Bake what you would bake and boil what you would boil, and all that is left put aside and keep till morning." So this is another part of the miracle. They're not supposed to keep anything over. There's not supposed to be any leftovers, except for on Friday. And on Shabbat, Friday night, whatever they had left in the next day on Saturday hadn't gone bad. So they gathered twice as much on Friday, and it's still good on Saturday. If they did the same thing on Sunday, it would go bad on Monday, but not on Shabbat. So that's also part of the miracle of manna, that it's there, that it is edible, that they've never seen anything like it. It's a miracle. But then also that on Saturdays, it doesn't go bad. Every other day it goes bad, but not on Saturdays. So this is another part of why this thing was so miraculous, why the manna in the Bible is considered such a miracle. And so when the rabbis talk about the great miracles done for us, manna is definitely one of them. And it was the sustenance that the Israelites lived on for 40 years. And it's where we get the famous phrase, "Man does not live on bread alone." Well, of course they don't, because in itself, it was a miracle. And, well, we're going to get to the what it tasted like in a second. But what's so cool about manna in this double portion is that we actually have a tradition of remembering the manna every Shabbat. Some people have a tradition of baking 2 challah loaves that were supposed to have 2 challahs. Why do we have 2 challahs, even if we have like nobody in our family? Why should we have 2 challahs? Some people get little challahs so that they can have the 2 challahs. Why is it a tradition? To remind us of the 2 gatherings of manna on Shabbat, on Friday night. That the people on Fridays got 2, and the 2 loaves remind us of the double portion of manna. It could also be that 2 is considered a good luck charm, that having even numbers was a superstition, but it's also possible that that's why we do it. We have 2 challah loaves. So if you've ever seen that, why people have 2 challah loaves, I don't know if you've ever seen that. That's a tradition that some people have. So Moses put it aside until morning, as Moses ordered, and did not turn foul, and there were no maggots in it. And by the way, this is how the people essentially learn about Shabbat. They didn't know what Shabbat was until this moment. Until they actually get manna, Shabbat maybe didn't really make sense to them. Now they actually see it in practice. They know that this is now a true miracle, that God has given them a miracle, not just of bread, but of Shabbat. And so consider that for a second, that Shabbat became the miracle of remembering all the other miracles. And let's take a look at what it said. Moses said, "Eat it today, for today is the Sabbath of the Lord. You will not find it today on the plain. 6 days you shall gather, and on the 7th day, the Shabbat, there will be none." Shabbat is a miracle. Yet some of the people went out on the 7th day to gather, but they found nothing. And the Lord said to Moses, "How long will your men refuse to obey my commandments and my teachings?" Again, they don't have the 10 commandments yet. They have like 1 commandment, to gather manna, and maybe the corollary or the 2nd commandment, gather 2 parts on Friday and don't gather it on Saturday. They can't keep it. They can't keep this 1 commandment. They can't keep 1 commandment. And again, this is a commandment that makes them appreciate Shabbat. How great is Shabbat? I don't have to work. They still went out. They wanted to go out and get more. So it must have been good, by the way. Mark that the Lord has given you the Shabbat. Therefore, he gives you 2 days of food on the 6th day. Let everyone remain where he has blessed you. Let no one leave his place on the 7th day. So the people remained inactive on the 7th day. So they get Shabbat, as you can see, before they get the 10 commandments. The 10 commandments is coming up. You're going to read it next Wednesday. We're going to read it, God willing, together. Shabbat is a great thing. We get it. It's the 4th commandment. They actually know what Shabbat is already, folks, because they got the manna. People forget that. They actually already knew it. They actually were taught it by the lesson of manna. The people remained, and it's the word, vayishabto. They rested. They were Shabbat on the 7th day. The house of Israel named it manna. Manhu. That's where the word comes from, manhu. And here in Hebrew, it actually says, Vayikra Beit Yisrael et Shemo manhu, that they kept it manna. And again, later on, it's manna, but it says manhu. Here it's called manhu. And here it says it was like coriander seed, white, and it tasted like wafers and honey. Now that sounds really, really good. Even, and that's the word, it's sapichit bidvash, that it's wafers and honey. Now that, I guess you get sick of it if you had to eat it 365 days a year. But think about if the protein source, your sustenance that you eat every day, tasted like dessert. I mean, that's the ultimate dream of every child who ever lived, that I get to eat Pop-Tarts every day and it's my only thing I get to eat. And it has all the good things that my mom tells me is in spinach and broccoli, that I can eat Pop-Tarts instead. That's a great dream. And it's a great miracle. And of course, I don't know what the calorie intake was on this. And I don't know if it was keto friendly, but I will tell you, the idea that God could give you something that tasted sweet, but was still the only thing you had to eat every day. That's why manna was a miracle too, was that it tasted great, tasted sweet. Moses said, this is what the Lord has commanded. Let one omer of it be kept throughout the ages, in order that they may see the bread that I fed you in the wilderness when I brought you out of the land of Egypt. And so Moses took a little jar of it and he put it off to the side. He said, we're going to keep this so that people will know that this was miraculous food that God kept giving us when we were in the wilderness. And Moses said to Aaron, take a jar, put one omer of manna in it, and place it before the Lord to be kept throughout the ages. And as the Lord had commanded Moses, Aaron placed it before the pact to be kept. Now, this is kind of anachronistic because they didn't have the pact yet. The pact is the 10 Commandments.
Oh.
So we don't have the 10 Commandments yet, but I guess the argument would be that they knew that they were getting the 10 Commandments. So I don't know. It also could be anachronistic, and somebody really didn't think about how that didn't quite make sense yet. But again, God knows. God
Maybe they already had the ark ready for the pact.
Except they build the ark after.
Oh, you're right.
We're gonna read that.
But Rabbi, it could be before is in reference to time versus place. So rather than before as a place, as opposed to before, it actually means before as in before the time of the pact.
Ah.
Why not? I like that. We'll use that one to explain it.
But the next line about the 40 years, we didn't know about 40 years then either. Explain that.
You are correct. Clearly the writer of this is looking ahead to the end of the story. because we don't actually get that until Numbers, that God says to the people, you're going to be there for 40 years. Yes, there's a couple of things in here which seem to be written by somebody who knows the way the story is going to end.
They read ahead.
It is interesting because, again, you can make the argument, well, God knows what's going to happen and it's not a secret to God. But yes, it is an interesting issue that people will, understand that, look, if you write something about it, as an all-seeing narrator, which God is, it's not impossible for that to happen. I'm just saying, look, these were things that everybody knew, right? So, when does somebody, like when I think about the way I learned Torah, and probably the way you learn Torah, and the way most of us learn, unless we're from another planet, if somebody asked you what was the first Torah story that you learned, you probably couldn't, honestly, you really probably couldn't say, right? You couldn't say, I think it was the flood, or I think it was the 10 Commandments, right? It would be really hard to say, what did you learn first? And there is something to that, which is, if you think about like which story you actually learned first, probably.
I can tell you the first story I learned, Rabbi.
Yeah, what was it?
I was in Hebrew school, and the teacher said, who knows who Abraham was? And I raised my hand. He's the 16th president of the United States. I'll never forget that.
You remember that?
I'll never forget it.
So
she embarrassed the hell out of me.
Well, that's not good. But the point is that it is really hard to know what part of the story you learn first. So if you're telling the story, definitely if you're telling it orally to people, if I tell you a story and I'm telling you the story, and you know roughly what happens in the story, I don't have to tell you the story. If I tell you something out of order, you don't go, well, that didn't happen yet. If I tell you, I want to tell you the story of how my ancestors came to this country. Now you and I know we're in this country already. So if you say, hey, they came to Chicago, or I don't know, let's just say, let's just say they came to Texas, but then they went to New York, and then you went back to Texas. If you told the story and say, and you live in Texas, you'd say, I'm not picking on the Shulmans, but I'm just saying, so there was a port in Galveston. Some people came into the port of Galveston, but let's say they went to Galveston, but then they ended up going back east or went anywhere. They didn't go, say they went to New York. I mean, that's even easier. And then you wound up back in Texas. No one would say, oh, if I told you the story and say, hey, we're in Texas now, but I want to tell you how our family got to Texas. Well, we didn't always live in Texas. We lived somewhere else. And so nobody says, oh, well, you told the story out of order because you told us that you live in Texas now. No one would say, oh, but you told the story out of order. No, you're telling the story purposely to tell us how we got back to Texas. So,
but Rabbi, if you really think about it, we were always taught in Hebrew school that Moses wrote the first 5 books of the Bible. Yeah. So if he's writing this, it makes sense that he put in the 40 years and the pact and all that, because he knows what's coming, because he wrote this, not.
So whoever wrote it, it wouldn't be. But some people, look, you noticed it. It is anachronistic, but it's not. It's not uncommon for people to tell a story like this, and you wouldn't stop them and go, yeah, but that part of the story hadn't happened yet. You don't.
Well, right, absolutely. I mean, you don't think twice about it.
Yeah, but it does presuppose that the person who's telling the story, and often, by the way, the person who's hearing the story, the people that are hearing the story, know how the story is going to end. And no question that the 40 years was a really important part of the story. And that's not ruining the story for people to know that it happened. As a matter of fact, you can make the argument that the 40-year wandering, or the 40-year in the wilderness, the punishment, is actually an important part of the story that's established early on by the fact that, oh yeah, everybody knew that this was a really big part of the story, that they didn't get to go right into the land. Anyways, the Israelites ate manna for 40 years until they came and settled the land. They ate the manna until they came to the border of the land of Canaan. So all that's important. Again, it says they ate it, by the way. And then, by the way, that's maybe why it says it. You can make the argument, because they want to remind people that they didn't eat it for the next 2 weeks. They ate it for the next 40 years. You can make the argument you'd actually have to tell the story that way. I mean, if I was telling the story, wouldn't you want to tell people that, oh yeah, they're going to eat this for the next 40 years? I mean, that's part of the miracle of this. If you told it at the end of the story, you might have forgotten where the manna came from. Putting it here actually makes sense, other than the drama of them going to be there for 40 years. But anyways, it is this issue of reading the Torah and realizing that it's constantly self-referential. And here, the Omer is 1/10 of an ephah. So what's interesting about this is it's like saying, oh, and by the way, a centimeter is, or 2 centimeters or 3 liters is roughly a gallon. Whatever you're going to say, it tells you that people were using different measurements by the time that they were writing or reading this. Some people were not using the Omer as a measurement. So
now we count the Omer later on in the year.
Yeah, so it's a different. So the Omer is a weight in. It's a dry weight in the counting of the Omer. This is a measurement
Right, but it's the same word though, isn't it?
100% the same word, but it's like,
Okay.
like the difference of saying something is well, there's an example of this in our common measurements. Hold on a second. If we say something is not a pound, but there's dry weights and liquid weights, right?
Right.
So, and by the way, another example, yeah, there's dry weights and liquid weights. And so this would be the difference between a dry weight and a liquid weight, the difference of the two omers. All right, so let's finish up because this is our last chapter, but we're running out of time. For the wilderness, from the wilderness of sin, the Israelite community continued by stages as the Lord would command. They had camped at Rephidim, and there was no water for the people to drink. It's another story of running out of water. The people quarreled with Moses and said, "Give us water to drink," they said. And Moses replied, "Why do you quarrel with me? Why do you try the Lord?" So he says, why do you quarrel with me? And why do you try the Lord? As if to remind the people that if you're quarreling with me, you're quarreling with God. But the people thirsted there for water, and the people grumbled against Moses. Again, they're grumbling. "Why did you bring us up from Egypt to kill us and our children and livestock with thirst?" Again, you're killing us, Moses. And Moses cried out to the Lord, saying, "What shall I do with this people? Before long, they will be stoning me." So Moses is not even, they're barely outside the land of Egypt. And he's saying, these people are going to kill me. The Lord said to Moses, "Pass before the people, take with you some of the elders of Israel, and take along the rod with which you struck the Nile, and set out. I'll be standing there before you in the rock of Horeb," which is that mountain where he saw the burning bush. We just read about it a few weeks ago. Again, seems as though it's also Mount Sinai, same name. "Strike the rock," same place, different name. "Strike the rock, and water will issue from it, and the people will drink." And Moses did so in the sight of the elders of Israel. Now, before I start hearing all of Israel right now, all of you saying, "Wait a second, Moses just struck a rock and water came from it, and God told him to do that." Doesn't Moses get in trouble in Numbers for doing the exact same thing? Yeah, and that's one of the things that people found strange, is that Moses there strikes a rock and water comes out and the people drink, and God gets mad at him.
But here, God is telling him to do it.
Correct. But this makes the problem even more pronounced, which is that, yes, Moses did more than what God asked him to do by striking the rock at the next one, at the one we're talking about in Numbers, Massa. Look, I'm only making the point that it makes it that much more difficult to fault Moses for doing something that God actually told him to do in another place. Now, again, he didn't follow God's word exactly. He struck the rock, and God told him only to talk to the rock. But Moses can make the argument, okay, I struck the rock, but didn't you have me strike the rock before? I was just doing kind of like what you told me to do. I thought we were doing the rock thing, with the rock and the staff. We're doing that thing, right? No. And God says, no, but I didn't tell you to hit that time. I told you this time. I told you to only talk to the rock. Again, you can make the argument, Moses, it's even worse that he gets in trouble there, because God's actually told him to strike rocks before. So in that moment that he makes a mistake, the mistake is even to some extent less grave because he's doing something that God tells him, has told him to do. Look, there is an issue here which we may have an explanation for why Moses doesn't do this big job of taking them in. We read in the Midrash class that maybe there were other reasons why Moses doesn't get to take the people in, including Moses' hesitation all along in doing this job, and Moses' answers to God, which is, God, why are you making me do this? But that God is arguing with Moses about this job from the very beginning. At the burning bush, Moses says, I don't want to do this. And as we read in the Midrash class, that the punishment that God makes to Moses of visits on him and says, you cannot take the people in, actually goes back to the burning bush and not to the striking of the rock. But it goes back to Moses' hesitation and Moses' problems all along, which is that Moses seemed very, very reluctant to do this job. And again, that the final punishment to some extent is almost a long time coming. And that maybe, by the way, that if God had told Moses all along, you're not going to take the people in, Moses would have backed out for real. That Moses, I mean, God knowing Moses, as God knows us, would know that Moses wouldn't have agreed to do this if he told them all along, yeah, but you're not, your job is not to take them in. I always like the idea that that was because God didn't want Moses to take them in, that God wanted another person to do it, but the people needed to see that Moses wasn't the only leader. But needless to say, we have this story of Moses striking a rock on God's command. And that's why it's confusing, folks. I will tell you, it makes it only more confusing that he did it here in Massah and Meribah. The place was named Massah Meribah because the Israelites quarreled and because they tried the Lord, saying, is the Lord present among us or not? And that is what they say. Is God here or not? And this last part of the Torah portion that we read in chapter 17 is Amalek. And it says that Amalek came and fought with Israel at Rephidim. Now, it is the rabbis who first postulate, and with good reason, the Amalek, the Amalekites, this group of people, this tribe of people, is punishment because the Israelites are still doubting God. That Amalek is there to punish us. The problem, of course, is that Amalek is to some extent, our eternal enemy. They are our nemesis, or are always going to be there to bring us down. But are they bringing us down from the beginning because of our refusal to take our role seriously and for us to be good messengers and good followers of God's will? Moses said to Joshua, pick some men for us and go out and do battle with Amalek. Tomorrow, I will station myself on the top of the hill with the rod of God in my hand, that staff. Joshua did as Moses told him and fought with Amalek. While Moses, Aaron, and Hur, it's the first time we've heard of this guy, Hur, went up on the top of the hill. Then whenever Moses held up his hand, Israel prevailed. Whenever he let down his hand, Amalek prevailed. But Moses' hands grew heavy. So they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat on it, while Aaron and Hur, each on one side, supported his hands. Thus his hands remained steady until the sun set. So this is a terrific difficulty for Moses to keep his hands up all day. And Joshua overwhelmed the people of Amalek with the sword. And then Lord said to Moses, inscribe this in a document as a reminder and read it aloud to Joshua. I will utterly blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven. And Moses built an altar and named it Adonai Nisi, which means Adonai will test us. That's what the word Nisi means, a test. God will test us. He said it means hand upon the throne of the Lord will be at war with Amalek throughout the ages. And that is the last words. Those last words, the laws of going to battle against Amalek. Again, in the book of Deuteronomy, that the Amalekites are our eternal enemies. And it says that God will blot out Amalek, that God will blot out their memory, which is interesting because later on in Deuteronomy, it says that God wants us to never forget, bless you. God will never forget. God never wants us to forget what Amalek did to us. So we read both kind of like feelings about Amalek, which is that on one hand, God will blot them out, but at the other hand, you don't forget. Now, that's kind of weird because Amalek is only remembered by us. There is no archaeological evidence the Amalekites ever existed. We have no genetic evidence the Amalekites ever existed. We have no historical evidence from any other source that they ever existed. God didn't indeed utterly blot out the memory of Amalek. The only people who remember Amalek are us. We're the only people who remember Amalek. The only account of Amalek is in the Bible. There is no record of them anywhere else. But why do we not forget Amalek? What?
Another miracle.
Yep.
There's no other writings, Rabbi, in any other.
Nope. We have no evidence that the Amalekites ever existed. We don't. We don't have a record from the Egyptians, from the Ammonites, from the Moabites. We have no external source that says the Amalekites existed. There's no proof other than the Bible and other than what the rabbis teach us. The Amalekites will never be gone until anti-Semitism is gone. The Amalekites represent anti-Semites in every age. So according to tradition, Haman was an Amalekite. According to, and we read this section, by the way, before we read the story of Purim, we have Shabbat Zachor. We remember the Amalekites, and we remember that section. We read that section as a special maftir to remind us of Amalek and to remind us who they were and why they were so bad. And that they represent evil and genocide against Jews in every generation. So the Nazis were Amalek. Every enemy that comes against us today are Amalekites. They are spiritual Amalekites. The problem we have with this, though, and why we have this horrible responsibility of remembering Amalek is that, again, as long as there are Jews, there's going to be people who are trying to destroy us. It seems like a fact. And one of the things that makes the Amalekites in particular, one would argue, well, why are they so bad? What did they do? Well, again, if God brought them against us, then they were punishing. They were punishers. They were simply doing God's work. But this other understanding, again, this is kind of the weird, but what else happens here? The Amalekites are considered really, really bad because they came and attacked us. According to later on in Deuteronomy, it says they attacked the weakest in our group when we were coming out of Egypt. They attacked the women and elderly and the children and the people who are at the back of the train because they were the people in the front were supposed to protect them. So they came around the back and tried to kill the most vulnerable people. But the rabbis also say that what happened here, if you look at it, they pointed out, if you read this carefully, the Amalekites attacked us right when we came out of Egypt, right when we should have had the greatest amount of recognition and people should have been in awe of us, that all the other nations, the Ammonites, the Canaanites, all the other people around us, the Philistines, they all should have been scared of us. And yet they come and attack us right when we're coming out of Egypt. We just beat the biggest nation in the world. And this little group of Amalekites come and attack us. And so what it did is it made the people feel, and it made the Israelites, it made everybody feel like they're vulnerable. Egyptians, they're nothing. We defeated them. But the Amalekites we have a problem with. And so what it does is it shows that the Israelites are vulnerable, that there are times when you can attack the Israelites and God doesn't seem to protect them. And so the lesson the rabbis take away from this is what the Amalekites did was they destroyed our credibility. They destroyed this fear that people would have had about us if they hadn't attacked us, if they hadn't brought us into this sense of vulnerability. And so that's what the Amalekites did that was so horrible, was that they made us seem vulnerable, and at a time when we shouldn't have been vulnerable, and at a time when people should have been afraid of us and should have been amazed by us. And they made us look, they brought us back down to earth. And that's why they're so dangerous. And that's why they were so what they did was so evil. So again, it's kind of this, on one hand, they're there to punish us maybe, but on the other hand, no, God, it doesn't say God had the Amalekites come and attack us. As a matter of fact, God seems to say, I don't want these Amalekites to run around anywhere anymore. I'm going to blot them out. So at a certain point, there are no more Amalekites. Again, later on, the last time we come into contact with the Amalekites is during the time of King Saul. He goes to battle against the Amalekites, seems to destroy the last Amalekites. We don't have any other record of them in the Bible. Though again, we have this idea that maybe Haman is a descendant of them. Some of them survived, a fragment of them survived. And again, according to Jewish thought, they have a spiritual descendants that exist at every age. And the Amalekites can manifest in every age as the enemies of the Jewish people.
They
so
did one thing though.
What?
I think that it made the Jewish people aware that unless they alert and take care of themselves, they can be vulnerable. So even with the Lord on their side, they need to be alert and aware and know that there are enemies in the world. And there have been enemies in the world from early times to now.
It's a very good point. And Joyce, to bolster that point, is when God says to Moses, inscribe this as a document, as a reminder, and read it out loud to Joshua, who's the next leader, right? After Moses, Joshua will be the people. And so Joshua is there, by the way. It says Joshua was there. He was the leader of the people. You know, Joshua could tell the story too. But by Moses telling the people and by Joshua preserving that story, there's generational responsibilities, you say, to remind people that you must be vigilant. You have to understand that these people will come against you, and that you never are complacent. You never say, hey, well, we don't have to worry about it anymore. And again, I think it's harder, you know, when you're in a place of strength, that you feel complacent. And by the way, that's one of the things that Israel has fought against over the last 30 years,
right?
That feeling of complacency. And again, not on one hand, not causing constant fear for people, but on the other hand, to know, there's a very existential threat that exists out there against us. And so as much as you don't have, Israel obviously had enemies like Hamas and like Hezbollah or some of the other enemies that, the PLO in Intifada, when they're blowing up buses and killing people, that there is a understanding that there are enemies, and those are people who killed people. But there's a difference between that enemy and a country like Iran, which presents an existential threat to Israel and has vowed to destroy Israel. And again, given the option and given the opportunity, will develop nuclear weapons to destroy Israel. And of course, this is something on a lot of people's minds now in the change of administration, that again, people cannot be complacent, that Iran is not, if given an opportunity, going to develop nuclear weapons and destroy Israel. And understand that Israel's other enemies, who are now their friends, namely Saudi Arabia and Oman and all the Arab world, the rest of the Persian Gulf, knows this, believes it, and is with Israel on this in trying to keep Iran from being armed with a nuclear weapon. And understand that that's what's behind the Abrahamic Accords. It was not that the Arabs somehow woke up one day and said, we love Israel, but that they are very scared of Iran and believe Iran when Iran threatens to do destruction, that they believe it. And what they also, by the way, that means that the Arabs believe that if Israel has a nuclear weapon, which they've had for 50 years, that Israel will not use the nuclear weapon on them.
Right.
Understand what this means? This means that the Arabs are comfortable with Israel having a nuclear weapon, which they have for 50 years, and don't trust Iran have a nuclear weapon for 5 minutes.
There's another factor with the new administration. One of the new members of the cabinet, I understand, was the leader of the BDS movement. There's nobody,
Joyce, who's a leader of BDS. There's a question of whether people are tolerant of BDS. And again, nothing yet is that these people are BDS leaders. I will tell you, again, we know who the really destructive people are, who are, people like, Talib and Omar. Those people are definitely champions of BDS. There's no question especially Tlaib. Now, the problem is that all of that stuff about BDS is bad. And again, those people shouldn't be tolerated and shouldn't be coddled at all. But none of that is important as what to do about Iran. And any of that kind of stuff. And again, Israel has dealt with BDS for a long time. And again, I'm not accepting of it. It shouldn't be accepted or tolerated by anybody in this country. It's against the law in this country to comply with BDS. But I will tell you this, that is nothing compared to Iran having a nuclear weapon.
Right. You're
I don't
right.
want anybody to that is so critical that Iran doesn't have a nuclear weapon, that everything else, when you talk about who's in charge and who's making foreign policy and who's doing this and who's doing that. And I will tell you, the only positive sign right now is that some of the people who were holdovers from the Obama administration, who were proponents for that Iran nuclear deal, I will tell you the message, and again, it is not in any way, I'm saying, a foregone conclusion. But the people who've been brought into foreign policy decisions into the State Department so far were not the main leaders of that Iran deal. It doesn't mean that the Iran deal isn't going to be revisited. I didn't say that. It could be that it is, and that would be horrific and really horrific and really, really horrific. But the people who have been given the power thus far are not those people who wrote that deal, who backed that deal, people like John Kerry who sold that deal to people. Those people have not been put in power yet. It could be, by the way, tomorrow, the next week, that could change. And that is a real fear. I don't want to say that, but as of this moment right now, it's not the case. But to get back to Joyce's point and to everybody here on this call, we have to be vigilant because there is a modern Amalek and there is a real fear that if Iran has nuclear weapons, that they would use it on Israel or that they would use it in the Middle East, and millions of people will die because this is an evil regime and it's a regime that is very, very dangerous.
Yes.
And by the way, if you want to watch a really good modern spy story about it, Apple TV's Tehran is a really compelling story of Israel's spy activity in Iran. It's only on Apple TV. And again, I know there's like a million different streaming platforms and you have to worry about another one. Tehran was like 10 episodes. And when it came out last year, it got a lot of fanfare. And again, it's on Apple TV, so not as many people have it. But what was so amazing about the show was it's all about Israel's subterfuge and working to try to stop Iran's deal after the thing came out. So it came out in October, September, something like that. After it came out, Israel, well, we don't know for sure, but we assume Israel killed the leader of the Iran nuclear program in a project that nobody really understands how it even happened, but somehow they were able to kill him. And the whole world is literally was amazed by it a couple months ago. And it was so weird because the TV show came out before that happened. So wow. I'm just saying, if you can ever watch it, if you have access to it, I think you'll enjoy it. I think you'll find it to be a compelling story. It focuses on a woman, an Israeli Mossad agent who's working inside Iran. And it's one of those kind of like, is she going to get caught? Is she going to get, it's very, very dramatic. And I think it's good. I really do think it's worth watching. So we end on the way we began, which is the media and the modern stories of Israel, which are is entertaining, inspiring, and in some ways as miraculous as the biblical stories. Because I'm telling you, if you read about how the Israelis took out this, or I would say the Israelis because they haven't claimed it, but it seems as though the Israelis did it, the way they took out the this Israeli nuclear head of the program, it's unbelievable. And according to this, literally the way he was killed, there were people sitting next to him that were not killed, but they were able to kill him. Nobody really understands how that happened. I don't want to say it's a miracle, but when you can do those kinds of things, it defies logic, and it is really amazing. Again, we don't celebrate when people die, and you don't want people to die, and when Israel minimized the collateral damage to take out the evil source of perhaps millions of people dying, that is a crazy miracle. So if you don't know about the story, look it up, read the story of this. And it only happened a couple of weeks ago. I mean, literally a couple of months ago. So if you did not read it, read the story of what really happened. And if you have a chance, watch Tehran and enjoy that media. In the meantime, everybody, please stay safe and healthy. And we look forward to seeing you all. Keep singing, by the way, because this is a week of singing and celebrating freedom. Please celebrate your freedom as a Jew, your freedom as an American, and sing songs of freedom this week. Okay.
Rabbi Mark, before I got on here, I was on a Hillel thing, and they interviewed a woman named Louise Lerner and her story of the Holocaust and how she survived. She was from France, and how her mother got her to Switzerland, and how a family took her in, and then how she went from Switzerland back to France, to Argentina, to Israel, and then to Jamaica. And she became an architect, and she lives in Los Angeles. It was very interesting because she survived, but the heartbreak of, just her telling this, and really the no connection with her family, because they were all so separated that even when they were together, there was no connection. And she said that was the saddest thing for her that she was talking about now, not really talking about all these things with her brother and with her parents when she could have. And it was very, very good. Her name's Louise Lerner. It was very interesting. She was good.
Read your story. Thank you for sharing that, Sandy. And again,
you're welcome.
Today was International Holocaust Remembrance Day, which is coincides with the liberation of Auschwitz. It's not our Yom HaShoah. And by the way, just so you know, in America, it is not the official Holocaust Remembrance Day. In the United States and in Canada, we follow the Holocaust Remembrance Day of Israel, which is the 27th of the month of Nisan. So if you look it up, Israel's Holocaust, and actually in America, we call it the 8 days of remembrance. It goes all the way from Yom HaShoah to Yom Ha'atzmaut. And in the United States, it was passed by law in 1997 or something like that. So we actually have Yom HaShoah as our official Holocaust Remembrance Day in the United States. But of course, every day we should remember the victims. Or could be 2 days or 10 days. It wouldn't matter. It could be every day. We should remember the victims of Holocaust. By the way, here's the story in the New York Times about when he was assassinated, and it happened on November 27th. So it was 2 months ago. And this is the New York Times, who, again, without being political, it's not known as a conservative publication. So it's not going to tell you that this was necessarily a good thing. But and again, it's not good when someone was assassinated, but Israel's top nuclear scientist, who American and Israeli intelligence have long charged was behind the secret program, was shot and killed in an ambush on Friday as he was traveling in a vehicle in northern Iran. Again, from what I've understood, or what I've been told, his wife was sitting next to him and she was not killed. So the fact that Israel was able to figure out a way to take out this nuclear scientist, but at the same time not kill people that were sitting next to him, literally like 5 centimeters away, it doesn't even seem possible. So I also take, again, pride in the fact that if Israel had to assassinate somebody, that they didn't kill other civilians. That by itself is kind of amazing. So again, let's just hope there's peace, and let's hope that Iran doesn't have a nuclear weapon, and let's hope that that when we talk about these things in the future, that we didn't say we were watching a nightmare unfold and we didn't do anything about it. So again,
and one last thing, Jim and I got our vaccines today at Magic Mountain.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you.
We started out talking about vaccines, so you missed it at the very beginning.
I'm sorry, I was on the Hillel thing.
No, that's okay. But I'm just telling you, that is exactly what we want to hear. We want to hear that
it comes back around. Yeah, it comes back around.
You weren't here, Sandy, but I'm only telling you because everyone will tell you. That's what I started with. Please, everybody, stay healthy, get vaccinated, get healthy, get healthy for you and for your for friends and family. So everybody stay good. It's good to see you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you. Bye-bye.